If you've ever driven through the Midwest, you wouldn't think much of Missouri, the calm little state in the middle of America that no one ever seems to talk about. Lots of country, farmland, and generally really nice people. But from the years of 1986 to 1989, a seemingly normal elderly couple would be convicted of multiple murders and become known to this day as the oldest couple ever sentenced to death in the United States. We have a lot to cover in this video. Not only murder, but injustice inflicted on one of the people accused in this case. I am also eager to share with you an interview segment with a man who worked on the case, and one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This is the horrific true story of the Copeland killings. Ray Copeland was born in Oklahoma in 1914. From a very young age, he started a life of petty crime. You see, he grew up during the Great Depression and had to drop out during the 4th grade to help his family. There are a couple of different stories that I've found, and I'm not sure which of them are true and which of them have been fabricated by media to, make a better story, but there are a couple that come up multiple times. One of them is that Ray Copeland one time stole a pair of hogs from his own father and took them all the way from Oklahoma to Eureka Springs, Arkansas, sold them, and kept the money for himself. There are other records of him staking out mailboxes waiting for people to drop off checks. He would then take those checks and forge a signature on the back of them and pocket the money. This was much of Ray Copeland's early life. He would steal cattle or livestock or forge checks, and this is a pattern that you can recognize multiple times throughout his entire lifetime. This is the main thing that he would do. This is what made him the most money. But his methods changed over time, and in the worst way possible later in this story. Faye Wilson was born in 1921, and she, like Ray, grew up during the Great Depression. Now, unfortunately, there isn't much that I can find about Faye's early life. There isn't any criminal record or history that I could find that would help to explain the later events of this story, which kind of makes sense. We'll get into all that situation later. Eventually, she met Ray. He bragged all the time about how good he was at making money, which during that time was a very good trait to have, and of course Faye wanted to be with him. They eventually married in 1940, and they would have 5 children. From then on, Ray would move the family all over the United States, as far as Fresno, California, back to Missouri. And as far as I could find, the main reason for this was that he was avoiding law. See, a lot of times he would be doing the same thing, either stealing livestock or forging checks. And in order to avoid the law, he would just move the family to a different city or a different state entirely. He either fled to California to avoid the law, or he worked out a deal with the man he stole from to leave the state. When he was 33, Ray was arrested again, likely for cattle theft. While Ray served his time in prison, Faye took care of the kids, most of the time by herself, I would imagine. They barely scraped by. She worked multiple jobs just to make sure the kids had food and stayed in school. Ray was released in 1950, and he moved the family back to Missouri, continuing to do what he did best. Ray Copeland was an extremely violent man. He commonly flew into fits of rage. He would beat his children, and even his wife. There is a quote here, and I'm not sure if it's entirely true. I couldn't remember finding any video evidence of one of the sons saying this, but this is an interesting story I'd like to share. And I would not be surprised if it was true. See, owning cattle obviously comes with chores to take care of them, and growing up on a farm, the boys would obviously help to take care of the cattle. The boys only had one pair of shoes that Ray would buy them, and those were their school shoes, as they were called, which were the nice shoes, and so Ray would not allow them to wear their school shoes inside the barn. They would have to go barefoot. This quote is from Wayne Copeland, the son of Ray Copeland. "We went barefoot in the winter. We used to mush our feet around in the cow shit to keep them warm. He thought it was funny as hell." There is another one from son Al Copeland, which there is actually video evidence of him talking about, so I will show it here.
He got mad at not being able to hammer a nail into a piece of wood. And I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He beat me with a pair of metal calculators. I mean, that was commonplace for him. The only thing he had to do was stay out of his way.
He treated Faye terribly too. He would commonly beat her, he would mock her intelligence, even though most people who look at this case are certain that Faye was definitely the more intelligent one. Ray could not read or write, but he would often brag about, how he made money, and he was the main breadwinner of the household, so he kind of acted like he could do whatever he wanted. You have to wonder how Faye could possibly have stayed with a man like Ray. I think it's an absolutely horrific thing to think about, especially because she would stand by Ray's side while he beat their children. She wouldn't really do anything about it. Most people speculate that she would do this out of fear of what Ray might do if she tried to step in. He might have done something even worse, so she would just leave the situation as is. In fact, whenever Ray spent time in prison, she wouldn't tell the children where he was. She would often just say that he was away on business. As the Copeland children got older, they all found their own reasons to leave the house, obviously to get away from their father. And in 1967, Ray and Faye finally bought a house near Morrisville, Missouri, where they would spend the next 20 years of their life, and it finally seemed to settle down for them. Life seemed to get a little more calm. Around 20 years later, in the 80s, Livingston County Deputy Gary Calvert is on a new case. See, a little while back, a drifter by the name of Dennis Murphy had attended a cattle auction and he paid with a bad check. Witnesses say that they had seen Murphy haul the cattle away in a trailer that belonged to Ray Copeland. When asked by the authorities, Ray just told them that he had hired Dennis as a farmhand, and when he bought the cattle, Dennis just took off with them that he hadn't seen him since. With the case seemingly going cold there, they left it. That is until police from another county come looking for a man by the name of Wayne Warner. Wayne Warner, like Dennis Murphy, was also a homeless drifter. And, just like Dennis Murphy, he too had paid for cattle with a bad check and was last seen driving away with them in a trailer owned by Ray Copeland.
Well, I suggested those deputies get the statements from Mr. Warner and Mr. Murphy. If they include that Ray Copeland was involved somehow, let me know. We'll help you with the investigation.
The only issue with this is that no one can find these men. And it makes sense because they're drifters. They go from one place to the next, either to a homeless mission or get hired as a farmhand and make a little bit of money before they just leave. It's still common today, and there's obviously no way that they could have possibly tracked them down. In August of 1989, the police would get a call from a hysterical-sounding man by the name of Jack McCormick. Jack McCormick was another homeless drifter, who said that he had been hired by Ray Copeland as a farmhand. He told the police that Copeland had him write checks for cattle, just like the other two men. The main thing that gets this whole case started, he tells the police that he had seen human remains on the Copeland property, a, quote, skull and leg bone. Jack McCormick was just like any of the other men that Ray had hired. Ray found him at the Victory Mission in Springfield, Missouri, and told him that he would pay him $50 a day, plus he could stay for free at the Copeland farm, which to a homeless drifter at the time is a total steal, and it makes sense why he would have wanted to stay with him. Adjusted for inflation, because that was back in the 80s, $50 then is $150 now, so obviously that's a steal. I had to look that up just to make sure. After McCormick agreed, Ray took him to a bank where he gave Jack $200 to open a checking account. From the bank, they went to cattle auctions where Ray told Jack that he couldn't hear the auctioneer well enough, so Jack would have to bid on the cattle for him. McCormick made his first cattle purchase for $2,000. The check would bounce because of insufficient funds because he only had $200, and that would become McCormick's problem and not Ray Copeland's problem. In his time working for the Copelands, Jack became suspicious of them, especially, he said, when Faye was looking at him. He said that whenever he was around the farm, he felt uneasy. His suspicions would be confirmed one day when Ray Copeland asks for help out by the barn. At this time, Ray tells Jack that he found a raccoon in the barn and needs help getting it out. He hands Jack a stick and they walk out to the barn, and tells Jack that he needs to poke the stick into the hay to get the raccoon to come out, and that when it comes out from the hay, he will shoot it with his .22 rifle. Once in the barn, Jack did as he was told, but he noticed a tractor had backed up near the barn with a two-wheeled trailer attached. On the trailer was a shovel and a piece of plastic. After noticing that, he turned around and found that Ray Copeland was pointing the .22 rifle right at him. Surprisingly, Ray didn't shoot him then and there. In fact, McCormick had Ray take him away from the farm because he said that he wanted to leave. But Ray insisted first that they stop by the courthouse in Chillicothe. There they picked up Faye. The three of them went to Brookfield after leaving Chillicothe, and there is where Jack closed his checking account. From there, McCormick refused to return to the barn for his belongings and ended his relationship with the Copelands right there. Given this new information, Gary Calvert now has more reason to open up the cases of Wayne Warner and Dennis Murphy, with 2 drifters gone missing after working for Ray Copeland, and a third one claiming that he'd seen human remains on the farm. There is enough reason to suspect Ray Copeland, and they are granted a search warrant for the Copeland property. On October 9, 1989, Ray and Faye Copeland are arrested. The first charges are for conspiracy to commit theft on account of the recovered bad checks from Murphy and Warner.
The day before they were arrested, they were over at our house, Mom and Dad both. And Mom wanted to say something. Never was able to say anything. And the only thing we heard was Dad telling her to shut up and let's go.
Police investigate the Copeland property. Once inside the house, they find clothes that belong to neither Ray or Faye Copeland, and they are assumed to be the clothes of the victims, keeping in mind that there is no evidence that they've killed anybody thus far. They also find bank and livestock records and multiple firearms, which isn't unnormal to find in an American farmer's house, and isn't really a damning piece of evidence. But they dig into Ray's past and discover his criminal history with cattle theft and check forgery. They also found a piece of paper inside an empty Polaroid camera case. On this piece of paper was a list of names. Each of them had a dash and another mark next to the name. The names on the list are as follows: Gary Misko, left. The Big Fat Man, back. Jim Harvey, X. Jim Gear, back. Wayne Freeman, X. Jack Holliday, back. Robert Root, back. Thomas Park, X. Paul Cowart, X. The names on this list match many of the names that were on the backs of bad checks recovered by the police over the last couple months. The men with back written next to their names are discovered to be alive. They were approached by Ray Copeland for the same kind of work that the other men had been approached for, although they ended up refusing the work. As you can imagine, the names with X next to them were all men who had gone missing. With this new information, the police start looking for bodies on the Copeland property, and you'd think that an entire search party with whatever equipment they may have might be able to find something, but surprisingly they don't find anything. Now you'd think that if Jack McCormick, of all people, with nothing, was able to find human remains on the Copeland property, why can't the police? And it's at this time that Jack McCormick admits that he lied about seeing bodies on the property.
I told him that falsely to get them to investigate, because I was so sure of what had taken place out here.
Although McCormick lied, the case surprisingly didn't stop. You feel like it might, but there's too much at this point. Although Jack lied about seeing remains on the property, that didn't stop the case entirely. In fact, with all of the attention that this case was getting from the media at the time, people actually started to call in and give hints to the police at where they think Ray might have hidden some of the bodies. One person called in saying that they knew of a farm that Ray Copeland had worked at that had begun to smell of decaying animals. Police went to that barn and discovered disturbed areas in the floor. They used a steel rod to poke down into the ground to see if they could find anything, and they did. They ended up finding 3 bodies. The police dug up these bodies and discovered that they were all wrapped in plastic. Each of the men also had a .22 caliber round in the backs of their heads. By using dental records, the police were able to uncover the identities of all of these men. They were Paul Cowart, John Freeman, and James Harvey. If you remember the list from a moment ago, Paul Cowart and James Harvey were 2 of the men on that list, and they both had an X next to their names. On October 17th, 1989, Ray and Faye Copeland are both charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Now, obviously, all the things in this story are terrible, but I swear this is like the only funny bit, and the rest of it is going to be serious. But after being arrested and charged, Ray Copeland tells the police that he overheard 3 guys saying that they had thrown a body down a well or something. And like, why? You've been arrested for 3 accounts of first-degree murder, and you're just gonna be like, oh yeah, I overheard these guys saying they threw a body down a well. It makes no sense to me. The only thing that I can imagine was going through his head was that, I guess, maybe he thought that one of the charges would be lifted if he helped them find another body. That's only, like, it's so funny to me. It's so funny to think that. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people speculate that Ray wasn't very intelligent, and I think this is the, like, number one case for that. I just thought it was funny and that it was worth sharing. Pardon me for taking you out of the seriousness of this case. Ray tells them where the well is, and the police are immediately dispatched out to the well to see what they can find. By using a grappling hook, they throw into the well, and after a couple times of pulling up trash or brush, they pull up a cowboy boot. And inside the cowboy boot is what's left of a human foot. After finding the foot, they bring in a backhoe, and they dig up the well and discover the rest of the body. This body is wrapped in plastic and also has a .22 caliber bullet hole in the back of its head. It is discovered to be the body of Dennis Murphy. If you remember from earlier in the video, this man's disappearance was what started this entire investigation. In a barn not 100 feet from that very well where Dennis Murphy was discovered, they find the fifth body. Beneath piles and piles of old hay and a dirt floor, they find the body of Wayne Warner, wrapped in plastic with a .22 caliber round in the back of his head, just like the other four men. Ray and Faye Copeland are now charged with 5 different accounts of first-degree murder, and Faye is tried first. The defenses in the trial argue that not only did Faye have no idea that Ray was murdering people, but that she was also another victim of Ray's. The term brought up whenever I've researched this is battered woman syndrome, which is probably exactly what it sounds like, but I'm going to read you the definition anyways. Battered woman syndrome, or BWS, is a psychological condition resulting from prolonged intimate partner abuse, characterized by learned helplessness, low self-esteem, and PTSD-like symptoms. It follows a cycle of tension building, acute battering, and honeymoon phases. BWS is used in legal cases to explain why victims stay or act against abusers.
She came as a regular therapy client brought by the deputies, pretty much weekly, for about 9 months. She looked extraordinarily beaten down, a very, very sad person. He was the complete dictator, and anyone who crossed him or for any reason that he was offended or upset, he would physically lash out at whoever was closest or whoever was on his mind. Right after they were married, he refused to pay her father for some work that her father had done for him. He stole food from her parents, and he tried to rape her sister.
Prosecutors actually did give Faye a deal. They said that if she gave them any information at all, they would remove the death sentence and reduce her sentence to only a few years in prison. However, each time they asked her, she would say that she didn't know anything, which doesn't make sense to me. I feel like that's a good deal, removing the death sentence and only a few years in prison, but we'll bring back the battered woman syndrome, and Marilyn Hutchinson explains this part again.
That's part of what's called learned helplessness, and it's the phenomena that when you've been beaten down so much and so long and so hard that even if the gate door is left open on the concentration camp, people sometimes didn't run because they just had lost the ability to see an opportunity.
Marilyn Hutchinson was able to give quite a bit of insight into the case, but I also know somebody who worked on the Copeland killings case, who spoke with Faye Copeland quite a bit. That man is my grandfather, Mike Walker, and I'm glad that I got him to do an interview segment for this video, to see if he could give us some insight into what he knows about the case. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview. We're doing an interview segment of the video. Today we're sitting here with my grandfather, who was one of the people who actually worked on the Copeland killings case. So please introduce yourself.
My name's Mike.
All right. I guess we'll just jump straight to the questions. What was your main role in the investigation?
I was an investigator for the Public Defender's Service for the state of Missouri, and I don't remember the date, but the first day that the Copelands were arrested, I was notified that we had a case that was going to be very large. I believe that was probably 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the evening. And so the next day, may have gone to Chillicothe to jail that evening. I can't remember.
All right. Next question is, what responsibilities did you personally handle?
Most of what I did, probably the most important thing that I did, at least in my opinion, was to try to keep Faye in reality. When a person is in jail for an extended period of time, they tend to lose touch with what's really important. It's not a psychologist, but I have no doubt there's big words that they use to describe that. So I did a lot of just talking with Faye to prepare her for a lengthy stay, pre-trial. And I don't know, I served hundreds of subpoenas and did lots and lots of interviews with throughout the community, and across the state, and wherever I needed to go, wherever they needed a subpoena served or a potential witness interview. That's where I went. Did a lot of witness interviews.
Were there any particular moments in the whole thing that changed the direction of the case as it went along?
Well, I don't think so. Initially, the prosecutor had quickly called in the Attorney General's office, the state Attorney General, to help with the prosecution, and they took the lead on the prosecution. And day one, the Attorney General floated out a deal that they would dismiss charges against Faye. I think maybe some kind of minor charge that they would hold on to if she would testify against her husband, which really sounds like a sweet deal. But if you find yourself in jail and the prosecutor says, if you will tell us who kidnapped the Lindbergh baby and we'll let you go home, you have to know something. If you don't know who kidnapped the Lindbergh baby, you're staying. And whatever information that they were wanting from her, I firmly, to this day, 37, 38, 36 years, I've lost track of time, I don't think that she knew enough. If she would have told everything that she knew, it would not have been enough to get her charges dismissed.
From your perspective, what misconceptions do people have about either Ray or Faye Copeland?
I never really interacted a lot with Ray, and I really don't know what people's conceptions are of him. I don't really know what people conceive about Faye. I think probably the biggest misconception is that she was capable of complex thought, complex issues, that she was, and not trying to insult her or disparage her memory for anyone, but I don't think I don't think she had the ability or the desire to have an understanding of what her husband was doing.
As I researched the case, I found more and more people that said that Faye kind of just went along with whatever Ray did, that she was an obedient wife, and that was kind of how she just lived life, and she would let him do whatever he wanted, pretty much.
Ray was definitely the leader of the house. He was clearly given to violence. We had many, can't use the word documented because no one would ever, even the children as adults with their dad in jail, knowing that he would very likely never get out of jail, would not write down some of the things that he did to them. He was very abusive. And you ask about misconceptions. I think a lot of times, and maybe I'm more aware of this now because I've passed into a different generation. And so I see generational differences much more vividly now than I did at that time. But I think the differences in husband-wife relationships have changed over the years. There's much more equality in relationships than there would have been in my generation, and a whole lot different today than what Ray and Faye grew up with and what they lived. And it wasn't unusual for a wife to be subservient. It wasn't unusual for her to be obedient and beyond. And particularly when someone, whether it's a business dealing that was straight across the board legit and honest, or particularly if there were shady business dealings or criminal business dealings. A woman involved in that type of relationship would have known very little about it, didn't want to know anything about it, and what they did know, they're never, ever, ever going to share.
How accurately at the time did the media portray the case?
Well, probably, I don't know that the media today is any less accurate than it was at the time. And they're absolutely inaccurate today. So the media has a tendency to want to sell advertising. And so whatever spin they can put on something to draw clicks in today's world, or views or listens in my world, that's what they do. The media could care less about fair reporting. That's not why they're there. I don't care what their commercial says. They're there to make money.
Mm-hmm. There was, I've watched a couple different documentaries about the case, and none of them can seem to decide whether or not Faye was guilty or innocent. Everyone seems certain on Ray's side that he was evil, but most, I think, given what I've heard from you and researched, I think Faye was probably misaccused.
I don't disagree with that at all. What her culpability was, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I don't think she knew nearly as much of what was going on as the state accused her of and what she was convicted of. It just, it's just one of those things that, like I said, on day one, if they would have known anything, she could have gone home. Yeah. And the most, and I'm sure you'll have questions later about some of the evidence that was used against her, but the evidence against Faye was essentially the most damning evidence was that she was married to Ray.
I know another piece of evidence they found was a list of names,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them matched the bodies that they discovered around the farms. And they found that it was written in Faye's handwriting. So that was another big thing that they were able to accuse her of.
What Ray would do is, and best of my memory, most if not all of the victims, the murder victims, and others that were taken advantage of by Ray, came out of Springfield, maybe some ties to Joplin, maybe some ties to other, but he would go to the homeless shelters down in Springfield and recruit workers. And he would bring those workers home with him, and they would stay at the house. And Faye kept a list of who was staying at the house. She said that she kept the list so she would know who was there.
Yeah.
And she kept, when they would leave, if she didn't know when they left or where they went, she'd put an X by their name, not knowing whether they were going to return or not. Another big evidence that they used was that a lot of clothing that belonged to the various homeless people that Ray had picked up were found at the house. To me, it shows that Faye possibly thought they would return. If Faye had known that Ray had killed these people, why wouldn't she have taken them out and put them in the burn barrel?
Right.
The other thing is that it is not unusual, and throughout my career of dealing, whether it was with a public defender or back when I was a police officer, or even in ministry positions that I've held, it is not unusual for a homeless person to have 3 bags of clothes that they picked up. And every place that they go, they'll leave some clothes. Part of that thought pattern is that they never know what they're going to need or where they're going to be. And sometimes, sometimes isn't accurate, frequently, they almost travel in a circuit. And they'll stay in maybe they'll stay in Joplin for a month. Maybe they'll go over to Springfield. Maybe they'll go to St. Louis, whatever their route is. Maybe they go to Little Rock. Just various people have different routes that they take. And they'll have a stash wherever they go. Not uncommon at all. I know the years that I spent working in prison, and I think anybody that's ever worked in a prison will tell you that people in prison will hoard things that they think they might be able to use. Where it may be a half of a piece of paper, or a quarter of a piece of paper, You never know when you're going to need a quarter of a piece of paper or what you might be able to trade that for. Somebody needs to send a note home and they don't have a piece of paper. You might be able to trade that for a packet of sugar. And so they keep lots of stuff. I've never had to live in a prison or in a jail cell. I've never been homeless, but I can only imagine, just knowing how I live, I probably have 35 screwdrivers, because you never know when you're going to need a screwdriver. And I've got drivers that have a bit head on them that I may only use once every 10 years, but the day you need it, you need it. And that relates to how they pack their bags, because you don't know when you're going to need it. One day during the Copeland case, I was driving down 36 Highway, and there was a guy walking down the road, and I started to. It was raining really hard. By the time I saw him, I didn't really have time to slow down. And I probably would have stopped and given him a ride, but he was carrying an umbrella folded up. Well, that's, in my mind, that didn't make a lot of sense. You know, this person may have mental illness. A couple of hours later, that same person walked into our office. He was a frequent visitor. And so I asked him, I said, why were you walking down the highway carrying an umbrella? He said, well, I borrowed it from my sister and she told me not to tear it up. And so he walked in the rain carrying an umbrella in case he needed it, and he did. It rained hard, but he didn't want to do it any damage, so he never did use it. It's a different, many homeless people have cognitive issues. Some of them maybe more emotional than actual cognitive. They live in a different world than I've ever lived in, and understanding them, if you work around them long enough, you can kind of put some pieces together. But the way that I was raised, the way that I've lived, it's really hard to make sense out of. But, you know, walking down the road with an umbrella in my hand is not something that you'll ever see me do unless the wind's blowing, you know. But it's a different mindset. It's a different way of life. And so these homeless people that were coming into the Copeland's home, some of them that left their clothes there weren't killed. Why did they leave clothes? Probably because they picked up more at the local thrift stores or the local giveaways that they liked better, fit better. They were more seasonal. You give many reasons that people leave things behind.
So the clothes probably weren't the most damning piece of evidence, even though that was that was used.
It was made out to be very damning. The list and the clothes were I feel like were the two things that persuaded the jury. Now, I wasn't on the jury, and I did attempt to interview some jurors, and none of them wanted to talk, which is absolutely their right. But I've always felt like that the list and the clothing were the two things that the state used to sell that Faye had to know what was going on.
Mm-hmm. This one is interesting. Were there any systematic failures that allowed the case to continue as it did? Do you think anybody was wronged in certain charges?
Well, I think I told you when we spoke several months ago that I have always felt like the public defender system failed on Faye's case. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, initially, Faye's case was supposed to be reduced to essentially nothing or maybe even go away. And so our local office was assigned to Faye's case from the get-go. Faye made attachments to myself and the attorneys that were involved. And but Ray's case was immediately given to the capital murder defense attorneys. Defense attorneys who are experienced and trained to file the proper motions, to do all of the things that capital murder cases are much more involved than a shoplifting case or a failure to return a VHS. I know there's no such thing today, but back in the day that was big. We got a lot of cases where somebody failed to return a cassette tape and were charged with it. But or even a typical shooting or a DWI, you know, all those things are so much easier to deal with than a capital murder case. And I know that I did the best that I could. The attorneys that I worked for were amazing, but they didn't have the expertise that she should have had. Now, if you go through the court records, you'll see that the judicial system found no cause to remand the trial or to turn it over or to order a new trial because of ineffective assistance of counsel, because they declared, basically the system declared that the system did a good job. And I admire the attorneys that represented Faye. I have great respect for them. And I don't think that I'm besmirching them at all by saying that attorneys who practice criminal law, criminal defense law of DWIs and non-capital murders and all the things that they handle, a capital murder case is overwhelming. It's very, very much more than any other criminal case. And when you have a district, we had public defender districts, and when you have a district office going up against the Attorney General of the state, that's kind of like a high school team playing a professional team. And again, I am in no way trying to disrespect the attorneys that I worked with. They did far and above more than anybody could imagine. But like I said, it's a whole different world. A capital murder, the capital murder division, that's all they work on. While the attorneys that I worked with were trying to prepare Faye's case, they were making multiple court appearances with scores of defendants every week while trying to prepare her case. The capital murder attorneys that worked on Faye's case may have had one other case pending at the time and may not. I don't know what they had in their office, but they are having a district office handle a capital murder case in the medical world would be like asking your physician's assistant or your local doctor's office to do open heart surgery. That's not what they do. And it was absolutely the system who grades the system should have never, ever allowed that to happen. So yes, there was a failure. The system failed. The Missouri Public Defender's Office should have never allowed that to happen. They should have called in another capital office. The capital office that handled Faye's case was out of Kansas City. I don't know what they have now. At the time, they had a capital office in, I believe, in Columbia and one in St. Louis. And one of those other offices should have been assigned to deal with Faye's case. But from the very beginning, everybody thought that it would be dropped. And I really think what happened is the Attorney General saw a slam dunk because the public defender wasn't bringing in bigger guns. Mm-hmm. And the Attorney General at the time was a very upstanding, righteous citizen who ended up in federal prison. So you'll never convince me that he wasn't, at that time in his career, wasn't looking to the governor's office or a Senate seat. And so he could wave this flag saying that he sent a woman in her 60s to the death row. That would be a feather in his hat. And I don't know whether he was guilty of what he went to federal prison for or not, but somebody thought he was. Mm-hmm. So my guess is, based on that, if you trust that system, then he probably was pretty despicable.
Is there anything about the case that you have never been asked that you think matters, that you think people should know about?
Well, I never been asked. The only people I really answered to were the attorneys, and I don't know that there's a question that they didn't ask me, or ask me to find an answer to. So no, probably not. And, I don't, that definitely is the only capital murder case I was ever involved in. I was involved in lots of different types of murder cases and lots of interesting cases. I don't talk about things. Yeah. And I don't, lots of people who've known me for 30 years don't even know that I ever did that kind of work. So I'm pretty good at leaving work at work, and I try to take home with me everywhere I go, but I'm pretty good at leaving work at work.
Just about all of them. I guess the last one is, what's the main thing that you want the audience to take away from this?
I think if there's anything important, because we can't change history, we can't go backwards and redo what's been done. I think probably the most important thing that we can all do in our lives that affects everybody that should be practiced by everybody is not to jump to conclusions based on what we hear on the news, not to jump to conclusions based on what we thought we saw, because I think anybody that's ever been involved in the justice system, whether it's civil justice or criminal justice, understands that eyewitness is not always really accurate, and particularly people's memories of what they saw. Their interpretation of what they heard is often flawed. I don't know how many times I will go back. I happen to have several doctorate degrees that I've earned from watching YouTube videos. And no, they won't send me any paper, but I've got, I've learned how to make things on a wood lathe, and I've worked on automobiles because I watch YouTube videos. How many times do I have to go back? Because what I thought they said isn't what they said. And so and that's while I'm sitting in my recliner. Can you imagine being a witness to something and the inaccuracies that the mind can do. Or just you see something, and maybe you saw it out of the corner of your eye and you just saw a fraction of it, of a traffic accident. But in your mind, you saw the whole thing. And that memory of it, that recall of it will change with each telling, and frequently people in law enforcement will talk to witnesses and then call them back in and talk to them again and have a completely different story. They're not lying. They're doing the best they can. But as humans, we have a few flaws, and recall is one of those. There are some people that are a lot better than others, but it's not hard to. It's not hard for a seasoned, trained investigator to get someone to change what they saw, because it's not much different than waking up. You're having a dream and you wake up, and an hour later you can't even remember it, or you remember it fairly clearly, or you think you do, and you go to tell somebody and it's different. You can't tell it the way you saw it. It's the mind does strange things. And anytime you witness a crime or an accident or anything like that, you've got various emotions going through you. Hormones start pumping from different parts of the body, and it all affects the memory and what the way a question is asked, the way the words that are used in a question can direct your memory one way or another. And so, it's just really, it's just part of it. And we have to understand that that's why we need hard evidence in courts. That's why courts require hard evidence. And then you have to interpret that evidence, and there'll be multiple interpretations. I think there were several things during Faye's trial, and I didn't sit in on very much of Ray's trial because I'd heard it so many times. I just wasn't interested. But there were so many things that, like the clothing, the list of names, I know there was one neighbor who said that at some point in time in the 20 years that they've been neighbors, had seen one time the neighbor had seen Faye shooting a pistol. And somehow, how is that relevant? And did she?
Mm-hmm. And they can just use that against her even more if they wanted to.
Yeah. And according to Faye, she didn't remember ever shooting a gun. Had family members in that age group, knew a lot of people in that age group because they were my seniors. Mm-hmm. And there still are lots of people who have never shot a gun. Lots of women who have never shot a gun. And it doesn't matter whether they live in the hills or live in town. There's probably more women today, I would guess, that have hunted and shot for sport than there ever were in Faye's generation. And so if she tells me that she'd never shot a gun, I would tend to believe her because of the generational differences. And when we look at this case or any other case from 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago, we're looking at it from 21st century eyes. And just like we can't cast judgment. I don't think we can cast judgments on the actions of what troops did during the Revolutionary War, or what troops did in the Civil War, or what settlers did on the plains when they were fighting Indians, because I wasn't there. And we can look at it through our eyes today and think, well, that wasn't very civilized. But remember, anytime you say that about something that happened in history, somebody's going to say the same thing about you in 100 years. Because the way we do things today is not going to make any sense to them.
I think I've covered just about all my questions. Is there, I guess before we end this, do you think there's anything we haven't covered in this segment that we should?
I can't think of anything. I think, from what you and I talked about previously, I appreciate the opportunity to share. I mean, I know that there are still people interested in this case and other cases, and I'm sure I talk about flawed memories. I know my memory's flawed in some ways, but I think it's always good to look back and try to see some of those things, I just try to think sometimes, what if there'd have been some intervention when Ray beat his wife or beat his kids?
Yeah.
What if there had been some intervention? Maybe things would have never gotten to that point. I don't know. But we can say that about a lot of things in history.
Mm-hmm. There's always a what if.
Always a what if. And that's not a very profitable game to play.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're just about done. Thank you.
Thank you.
On November 1st, 1990, Faye goes on trial, and she pleads not guilty. As mentioned in the interview segment, the two most damning pieces of evidence were the clothes left behind by the drifters and the piece of notebook paper with the list of names on it. It was thought that the trial would conclude with Faye's charges being dropped. However, due to improperly filed paperwork and objection by the Attorney General, Marilyn Hutchinson is unable to testify in court and bring up battered woman syndrome. Another piece of evidence that was brought up was a note that Faye had written to Ray while they were being held in jail. I can't find anything that says exactly what the note said or even a picture of it, but the part of the note that most people say was damning evidence said something akin to nothing found, nothing gained, and that everything would blow over soon and they could go home. Which doesn't really mean much if you think about it, but I believe that people thought that she was saying that they had found no more bodies on the property, and that people believed that maybe she was saying that there were more bodies on the property that people hadn't found yet. Prosecutors used this note as more evidence against Faye, believing it to be a cover-up for more stuff that they had done on the farm. But many people, myself included, believe that it's just a letter from a worried wife to her husband. As mentioned in the interview segment a moment ago, the two most damning pieces of evidence were the clothes left behind by the drifters and the list of names with the drifters' names on it. Now, because the names of all the people that were killed had an X next to their names on the list, people obviously believed that she knew what was going on and that she played a part in the murders. Without Hutchinson in the court to testify about BWS and all of this seemingly overwhelming evidence, the jury all agrees that Faye Copeland is guilty of first-degree murder and she is sentenced to death by lethal injection. On March 7th, 1991, Ray Copeland goes on trial. His trial is very similar to Faye's, and it ends with him being declared guilty on all 5 accounts of first-degree murder, and he too is sentenced to death. Ray's sentence was never actually fully carried out. 2 years after his trial, at the age of 78, he would die of natural causes in prison awaiting his execution. Either way, a fitting end to his story. Faye still refused to say much, but eventually she did open up just a little bit. In 1999, her death sentence would be commuted to life in prison based on undisclosed testimony of her abuse from her husband. After serving 12 years in prison, Faye suffered a stroke and was committed to a nursing home. Just a year later, in 2003, at the age of 82, Faye Copeland passed away. You can make of all of this what you want, and tell me in the comments what you think, but I believe that Faye was innocent. Based on what I've researched and read, and based on my conversations with my grandfather, I don't think there was substantial enough evidence to declare Faye guilty. I do believe she likely had no idea Ray was murdering anybody. She was simply a loyal wife who just kept the records and did her job and stayed quiet. There are many who believe that Ray Copeland killed more than just 5 men. In fact, 3 of the men who worked for him, Dale Brake, Franklin Hudson, and Thomas Park, are still missing. Whatever remains of these men likely still remains beneath the Copeland property to this day.